4th, 1941. Incredible as it may seem, these crates marked the start of the development of the first jet engine in America. They contained an experimental engine which was flown to the United States from Great Britain under great secrecy in the fall of 1941. This flight was the direct result of a conference in the Washington office of General Arnold a few weeks earlier. Here was the actual beginning of the jet story in America.
Gentlemen, I give you the Whittle engine. Consult all you wish. Arrive at any decision you please, just as long as General Electric accepts a contract to build 15 of them.
These were the plans of the first turbojet engine that had been successfully produced by any of the Allies. They were the results of a long, hard struggle by England's group captain, Frank Whittle. He had worked toward jet propulsion in the face of many difficulties, and he had succeeded. The Air Corps felt that jet propulsion had tremendous possibilities, and the British Air Ministry made all their information available to the United States. The men of General Electric knew from their work with the National Advisory Committee for Aeronautics that the essentials of a turbojet were a compressor and a turbine.
I cannot overemphasize the secrecy and the importance of this work. We know that both the Italians and the Germans are working on jets. I hardly need tell you that they must not win the race.
General, given unlimited priority, we will have the first unit running on test in 6 months.
6 unbelievably short months in all to plan, design, and build the first American jet engine for a revolutionary new principle of flight. Yet these men were able to make this promise to their government in time of war because actually this problem was not new to them. It really began on the campus of Cornell University in 1903, where a young mechanical engineer named Sanford Moss was working for his PhD. He was engaged in research for his thesis on gas turbines. He and his work had been consigned to this little building because there seemed to be a certain amount of noise connected with it. Not to mention smoke and odd smells. When he had completed his work at Cornell and received his degree, Moss went to General Electric, where he joined other experts and continued his work. Later, they set up a research department to study turbines of all kinds, as well as compressors, pumps, boilers, and related equipment. By 1918, Moss and his fellow workers had accumulated a tremendous amount of knowledge in relation to turbines and compressors, and as a result, he was called to Washington. There, the National Advisory Committee for Aeronautics initiated work with Dr. Moss on a practical turbo supercharger, which the Air Corps hoped would increase the altitude performance of its World War I fighters. A gasoline engine runs on a mixture of air and fuel which burns in a cylinder. At higher altitudes, the atmosphere becomes progressively thinner so that the engine cannot get enough air to burn as much gasoline as it should for maximum power. The turbo supercharger simply adds a compressor to the engine, which packs or charges the thin air into the cylinders. This allows the engine to burn more fuel and deliver full power. The compressor is run by a turbine, which is turned by the exhaust gases of the engine. Moss's work on the turbo continued, and his improvements had a tremendous influence on aviation. In 1920, the Army established a world altitude record of 36,000 feet, proving the turbo in air so rarefied that the pilot became unconscious and fell almost 6 miles before pulling out. General Billy Mitchell's famous test, which demonstrated for the first time the tremendous importance of air power, was actually made possible by Moss's turbos. Mitchell's plane had to come in at 15,000 feet in order to avoid theoretical anti-aircraft fire. To give a plane enough power to carry a 2,000-pound bomb at that altitude, Mitchell had General Electric turbos installed on new twin-engine Martin bombers, and the results made aviation history. Was greatly intensified. They quickly became standard equipment on such outstanding aircraft as Republic's Thunderbolt, Lockheed's Lightning, Consolidated's Liberator, and old reliable, the Boeing Flying Fortress. The high-altitude daylight strategic bombing operations which destroyed the strength of our enemy in Europe would not have been possible without turbos. They have contributed immeasurably to the science of flight and continue to do so. They are used on some of today's finest piston engine planes. The most formidable weapon the world has ever seen was carried by a turbo supercharged plane. So in 1941, with a new but related problem, it was only natural for the Air Corps to again turn to the same organization and ask them to build the first American turbojet. And build it they did. At a series of secret meetings 1 month before the arrival of the Whittle engine, the project had been started with a small nucleus of key personnel. These men picked those they wanted to work with. However, in most cases, they did not let them know what they were to work on. There were over 1,000 men on the project, but less than 100 actually knew what they were making. Planning and assembly of the engine itself was segregated in an entirely separate building and heavily guarded 24 hours a day. Many of the parts were made in the regular supercharger department, but as a further protection, the project was called a new type of turbo and simply given another production number, Type I. All the vast resources of the company were thrown behind the project. The knowledge gained in years of production and design of giant turbines of every kind. The research laboratory for special metals. The experience gained in the manufacture and operation of thousands of turbo superchargers. And the vast store of knowledge of the consulting laboratories. During the actual design and manufacture under D.F. Warner, these great resources led to the modification and improvement of the Whittle engine. For example, the English had trouble with turbine bucket forgings because of the high temperatures involved. But it was an old story to these men, and their long experience with turbos hastened the solution to this problem. Also, the English impellers had been giving trouble because of cracking, but skilled craftsmen were already making hundreds of thousands of successful impellers for all types of superchargers. American techniques of rotor balancing were very advanced and contributed greatly to smoothness of operation. Yet in spite of the diversity and size of the operation, there was not a single failure in security. Today we realize even more fully than the pioneers the almost incalculable importance of that first American jet engine, the forerunner of the engines that power the military planes of today. Yet those early workers seemed to sense the true value of their work, and it brought them together. There was a wonderful spirit of common purpose, of cooperation between the people who did the work, Britain, our Air Force, and the men of General Electric. In this atmosphere, the engine grew at an unbelievable rate, until at last the first engine, right on schedule, rolled under heavy guard into the test cell. Now they would see the results of 6 months of round-the-clock effort. But they would see much more than that. They would see the birth of the jet engine in America. They would see the first really radical change in air power since the Wright brothers' flight so many years ago. They would see the first faint beginning of a whole new era in the age of flight. That is, they would see it if the engine ran. needed was to see it fly.